the answer. 1 Corinthians 7, I'll remind you up to where we are. I won't go back over last week's, but we've looked at the priority of marriage, the purpose of marriage, the pattern of marriage, our pulling together in marriage, preferring one another in marriage. And then the last point here is pleasing our spouse in marriage. We looked at the physical relationship last week from verse 1 through 9 here in 1 Corinthians 7. I want to pick right back up from verse 10. He says, "And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. But and if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Let not the husband put away his wife. But to the rest speak I not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she," notice this, "be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. For what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife?" Skip down with me to verse 33. Verse 33. And we looked at these verses last week, but he says, "But he that is married careth for the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There's a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband." We're going to finish this thought up of pleasing your spouse, and not only in the physical relationship, but here we're dealing with the second and third point under this topic would be these: pleased to remain with you, from verses 10 through 16, but also a pleasant reality in verses 33 and 34. And here's what we mean. It's a simple thought, but there's a lot said in Scripture about this. If you come back to verses 10 through 16, and more specifically verse 12, I want you to see, "But to the rest speak I not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him." Can I tell you that we're not dealing with a husband and wife here who are living and acting out what true Christianity looks like and the godly representation or pattern of Christ in the church. We're talking about a saved individual who is married to a lost person. And here's what the Bible highlighted about their spouse, and that is that your spouse, you're the Christian here, with a lost person as your spouse, they ought to be pleased to remain with you. You ought to think about that they ought to be pleased to remain with you. What do you mean? I mean how you treat them as a believer and as a Christian, where you're putting them first and you're pulling together and you've prioritized unity and all those things. You have the right mindset that we've talked about over and over again already. It ought to cause them to go, "I couldn't find a better spouse anywhere." And they ought to go, "I definitely couldn't find it in the world." I mean, I look at all my friends and I look at everybody at work and they all talk bad about their wife. And here I am. I have a good wife who loves me and takes care of me and puts me first. I'd never want what they have. And they'd have to say, "Well, what's the difference?" Well, the only thing I can come up with is she's a Christian. Your wife ought to be able to say, "Man, he helps, he provides, he's faithful to help in my aloneness. He's faithful to help, right? And all those assistance and an abundance and all those things. My life's just so much better with my husband. He's not like what I see on TV. He's just different than anything I've ever seen. All my women friends get together and they all gripe and complain about how their husband isn't there and how he's cold to them. But here I have a husband that loves me and cares for me and is interested in me. I don't know what they're complaining about. I love my husband and I'm happy to be with him." And they're lost. That's how good of a spouse you're supposed to be. That even if your spouse wasn't reciprocal. You were who you were anyway. Not only is it that we ought to, that they ought to have that mindset that staying with you ought to be better. Look at verse 14. For the unbelieving husband sanctified by the wife, the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. Hey, you're supposed to be showing them a better way. You're supposed to be showing them what it means to be a Christian, what it means to live for God. You're supposed to be showing them a better way than what the world has to offer. Can I tell you, this is what Paul's dealing with in Peter is dealing with. I always say that. Paul wrote 1 John 2 to me. What Peter's dealing with in 1 Peter, come back over there, chapter 3. 1 Peter 3. I was telling Brother Gill before church, about an hour before service, Drew kind of checked on me. It was about 5 o'clock. He's like, how you feeling? I was feeling rough. I nearly stayed home. There's one predominant reason why I didn't. The finals are on. And I didn't want anybody saying, oh, you just stayed home. And I'm going, I got to drag myself to church tonight whether I feel good or not. The championship series of the NBA playoffs. Also, the Stanley Cup finals are playing. Sam Bennett did a great job yesterday. We're very proud of our Sam Bennett. And anyway, 1 Peter 3, notice, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning. You see what this is? This is a lost man married to a saved woman. And here's what the Bible says, that your actions as a spouse ought to cause your husband to see, and what we said, you should be showing them a better way, how that they can observe your conversation and your fear of God, and they can observe that, and it's so visibly different than what the world has to offer. Hey, listen, when the world looks at your marriages in here, when there's two saved believers who are married together, joined together, when the Lord looks at your marriages, they ought to be able to say, that's what we're looking for right there. You ought to be careful when you're at work not to get caught up talking down about your spouse like everybody else does. In fact, you ought to go out of your way to be, man, I don't understand y'all. Y'all must have picked some bad ones. Did you not go to church? Where did you find your spouse? Did you not get God's will for your life? Because, man, my wife is something. My husband's incredible. You go, oh, I'd never do that. I know. It ought to be that it's so markedly different. Verse 4, let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God a great price. For after this manner in the old time the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well and are not afraid with any amazement. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together, grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Let me tell you, not only should it be that we staying with you ought to be better, but you're showing them a better way. But the last point in 1 Corinthians, you don't have to turn back there because we'll be, or you can turn back there, but hold on to 1 Peter 3. 1 Corinthians 7 is this. It ought to be that they're pleased to remain with you because you are sanctifying, or let me say it this way, you're showing them the way of salvation. In 1 Peter 3:1, he said that they might be won by your conversation. In 1 Corinthians 7, he says this in verse 16, for what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Here's an unbelieving man married to a saved woman. And Paul said, who knows? They might just get saved because of it. Well, what's the reason for me to to live right and to do right and to represent Christ right in my home, well, maybe, just maybe, it'll produce a saving knowledge in your unsaved spouse. And let me tell you, kids, please get this. Please, 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 please listen. There's a reason why the Bible is very clear to not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. You think it'll be easy to live for God with someone who wants nothing to do with God? You better pay attention. The Bible is very clear. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. If you've ever tried to run a three-legged race with someone who doesn't want to run a three-legged race? You ever tried that? I'll get Octavian up here, wrap my leg around his and say, okay, Octavian, run to the back. How far you think he's going? He ain't going anywhere if I don't want to go. You realize that? I got him outweighed by 100 and something pounds. Maybe 200 pounds. No, I got him outweighed real good. He could struggle all he wants to, but can two walk together except they be agreed? So it's not easy. It'll make your life a whole lot harder. You better make sure. Listen, I cannot put enough stress on you. You better marry the right person who God has for you. Better make sure. But we're talking about after the fact. Well, what happens if I married a lost person? What happens if that takes place? Well, you still have to act like a Christian whether they do or not. And listen, it's a whole lot easier to act like a Christian with a Christian than it is to act like a Christian with a lost man. It's hard enough to act like a Christian to other Christians. Somebody say amen. Don't you struggle with it? I mean, if we didn't struggle with it, I would never hear anything about somebody else in the church. Preacher so-and-so. What should I do? Act like a Christian. But they're not. Yep. Welcome to Christianity. Isn't that it? But it's a whole lot harder when it's the world. But they might just be saved. But not only that, and this is something that most of the time when people separate, they stop thinking about, and that is the children. Look with me, verse 14. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Notice this, else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. Well, why shouldn't I just leave my rotten, sorry, no good, lost husband? Why shouldn't I? Hey, what about your kids? You're so self-centered and self-focused and blaming them for your selfishness that well, my kids will understand. No, they won't. Ever. And listen, nor should they. They shouldn't have to understand why mom and dad divorced. They shouldn't have to. Their mom and dad aren't supposed to get a divorce. Well, I don't get why my kids aren't talking to me. You did that. So you leave your kids with your unbelieving spouse. Now what influence do they have? Do you think as a parent that you're not still responsible and going to stand before God and give an account for how your kids were parented? You say, well, I wasn't there. Well, that's not their fault. He gave them two parents. I know that's a little harsh. So let's just go ahead and move on. Come to Exodus 21. Here's what it means to be pleased to remain. Exodus 21. Here's a picture of it right here. Exodus 21, look at verse 1. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he come in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master hath given him a wife, she hath borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. So there it is. Husband married a wife while he's in servitude. Within the 6 years of paying off his debt, that's what that was used for. So within that 6 years, here's what the Bible said. If he came in by himself, he's to go out by himself. You've served me, you've done your time. Watch now. Here it is. Just like if the unbelieving depart, let them depart. You're free to choose what you want to do. Do you want to stay? Do you want to go? It's up to you. We're not going to push you out the door. I know there's a lot of women like that. Oh, no, my husband left me. No, you pushed him out the door, packed his bags. Oh, yeah, he left you. Woe is you. I mean, good night. You were asking him to leave. Don't you want to leave? Why don't you just leave? I don't know why my husband left. You. Here it is. He's been given the opportunity. Look, the door's open. Scripturally, God said in the 7th year, hey, he's allowed to go out free. He came in with nobody, he can leave with nobody. We're talking about little kids. They can't be 6 years old. A man has a wife and small children. By the way, you say, well, what's going to happen to the wife and small children? Here's the picture. The master takes care of them. That's a blessing. That's a blessing for anybody who's ever had anybody walk out on them. What are you saying? The master will take care of you. He can take care of you. There's a special place for fatherless children in God's heart. Widows. Women whose husband isn't around. God pays attention. And it's the master. So watch. He said, okay, here you go. What is he going to do? Well, look at verse 5. If the servant shall plainly say, notice this, well, I love my master. Notice, my wife and my children. I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. You know what he decided? Look now, this is what he said it would take place. He said, you know what? I love my master. Well, that's a good place to start, the right priority in marriage. What do you mean? Him first. I love my master, but watch, my wife and my children. We got the priorities straight. It's not, well, I'll stay with you for my kids' sake. Wrong priority. It's the master, the spouse, and the kids. But here's what he said. I love my master, my wife, and my children. So he's willing to put up with whatever pain. He's willing to stay, and it's a forever thing. He's willing to be known as and connected to that family. And listen, the idea here is this, that if his wife and if his children, right, are hard to be around, you think this Hebrew servant's going to say, you know, I think I'll put up with extra of that? Do you really think if his environment is toxic, home is rough, can I tell you, there's a responsibility for you and I on our part as a spouse, that our spouse ought to be pleased to remain with us? What do you mean? They ought to say, no, I'll never leave. Even given the chance, I don't want to go anywhere else. Where would I go? I love my master. I love my wife. I love my kids. Hey, this is my family. This is my home. This is where I want to be. But what are you and I doing as a spouse to make our home where our spouse wants to be? Sometimes you make it hard on your spouse to remain with you. So how do you know that? Because there's times I make it hard on my spouse to remain with me. Can we be honest tonight? It shouldn't be that our spouse has to put up with us. It ought to be that they're pleased to be with us. Not only this, but come with me back to 1 Corinthians, and we'll try to bring this down through these verses and keep 1 Peter and be done. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, not only pleased to remain, verse 33 and 34, we're dealing with a pleasant reality. I'm talking about pleasing our spouse. In each of these areas, we're dealing with being pleased with our spouse. Can I tell you, that requires putting the other person first. Every time. Focusing on their betterment, their enjoyment, what's good for them. It is not supposed to be. All right, sometimes we get this where in our society it is typically, and interestingly enough, we've had a generational swing from one side of the pendulum to the other. And listen, here's what I mean. There's been a generation in our history that said it doesn't matter what the wife goes through. I'm talking about hell at home. It doesn't matter as long as dad gets everything he ever wants. From one extreme to the other today, which is if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And so we go to great lengths to celebrate Mother's Day. And interestingly enough, women get to celebrate Father's Day. But how dare you be a guy and celebrate Mother's Day? Oh, that's like the cardinal sin of society. You say, well, there's no dads that are moms. There's no moms that are fathers. I mean, I thought we knew this. But moms get to celebrate one, but fathers don't get to celebrate the other. And all I'm pointing out to you is the hypocrisy that says this: one spouse is more important than the other. So mom gets pedestal, dad gets shafted. What'd you get, Mom? Kay's jewelry. Isn't that what they promote? Right? Jared's, diamonds, and rubies, and bracelets, jewelry, all these fine things. What'd Dad get? Socks. Yeah, that seems fair. You say, oh, that's because you're a dad and you're just advocating for Father's Day. Ask my kids what I told them I wanted for Father's Day. Love and affection. That's all I asked them. What do you want for Father's Day? Love and affection. I don't even want a girl. I got a girl. I'm good. Do you understand? Now, my kids do a great job of this. My wife does a great job of promoting my children's father. She really does. She really does a great job with this. But do you understand? It shouldn't just be, oh man, we got Mom this great Christmas present. We got her this, we got her that. What did you get Dad? We didn't know what to get him, so we got him socks. We didn't know what to get him, so we got him, whatever. It's an afterthought. Now, I don't care which side it's on. If that's Mom that gets afterthought, that's a problem. If it's Dad that gets that, it's just as much a problem. Well, Mom's always busy. She's always doing for our family, and she's always working real hard. And so we just want to, wait a minute, pay attention. Pay close attention. This cannot become a counting game. When your marriage becomes keeping score, you both lost. Every time. But there needs to be A pleasant reality. Look at 1 Corinthians 7, look at verse 33. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. Verse 34, the end. She that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. 1 Peter 3, it talked about we are heirs together of the grace of life. Guys, it ought to be stuff like this. My wife doesn't like flowers. At least not ones that you buy like in a bouquet. If they're planted, maybe that's one thing. But if they're going to die in a week, that's not her thing. There are some of you that understand. But I know some women who flowers are their thing. That's like their love language. You get flowers at work, she gets to show off to her whole work. Look at this. My husband loves me. That makes her day. If that's your spouse, look, you go, I just don't understand it. It's stupid flowers. Hey, that's not the point. If that's what your spouse enjoys. See, here's the thing. When we show our spouses love, we can be so selfish that we only do it how we want, not how they want. And that's not the point. If even your selflessness is selfish, that's not a pleasant reality. When it's all about you, even when it's about me. Oh, honey, we're going to make you have the best day ever. Really? Yep, we're going to do all these things I like. I guarantee you this. If I told my wife, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make the best day you could ever ask for. We're going to go play basketball. Wouldn't that be something? Aren't you happy? We're going to go to the gym. Isn't that great? Play basketball. Go to another gym. Gym rat. We'll go to the sporting goods store. Aren't you happy? Stop by Cabela's on the way. No, we typically like the same food, so I can't even come up with one that I could go to. Arby's. You want to go to Arby's? She doesn't like Arby's. Not much. Well, aren't you having a great time? No, you are. You understand the difference? Pleasant reality. Come back to 1 Peter 3. Let me show you what this should look like. 1 Peter 3. Give me 2 more places of Scripture and we're done. With the wives, it is interesting, and I'm just going to hit this one more time while we're here because it's in the passage. But look at verse 3. Who's adorning? Who's adorning? Let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting of the hair, wearing of gold, or putting on of apparel. Ladies, I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. You're doing that stuff, what you wear, what the makeup, doing your hair. You do that for women, not for your husband. That's true. You change your hair, change your makeup, get a new set of clothes, come into this church. You know who's going to notice? Women. You know who's not going to notice? Your husband that you came to church with. Some lady at church is going to be like, oh, you got your hair done. Your husband's like, you did? My daughter, as soon as my wife did her nails, you did your nails. You did? She's like, I was waiting to see if my husband. I'm not going to notice. Why? I'm doing that for him. No, you're not. No, you're not. Brother Brian wasn't in here last week. I'm not even going to mention it. I'll just say it this way. It's not that outward adorning. that you wear for your husband. Hello. You're welcome. But obviously here in the passage we're dealing with the hidden man of the heart, verse 4. A meek and a quiet spirit. I don't know what y'all were thinking. He's talking about your attitude, which is in the sight of God of great price. Can I tell you? Being pleasant, having the right attitude. But verse 7, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto your wife as unto the weaker vessel, as being heirs together grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. So we find here, we're dwelling with them according to knowledge. Hey, husbands, make it a point to know your spouse. We may not be naturally inclined to pay attention to those things. It doesn't mean we shouldn't know them. It's a good idea to know your wife's favorite color. It's a good idea to know your wife's ring size. It's a good idea to know your wife's clothing sizes. You say, why would I need to know that? It's a good idea. It's a good idea to know some of these things. Where her favorite restaurant is. What her favorite meal is. You see, you want your wife to dwell with you according to knowledge. Hello? It'd be a good idea for you to dwell with her according to knowledge. And giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel. She shouldn't have to tough things out just because you're a man. I don't understand. It's not that hard. Hey, you're not supposed to, you don't want a dude. Come on, be a man. No! There's too much of that in our society to begin with. No! You shouldn't have to be a man to put up with you. In verse 8 through 13, notice this. Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. This is what a pleasant reality looks like. Love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. All right. Come to Acts 24. I'll show you this, and we're going to be done. Galatians 5:13 says this, by love serve one another. By love serve one another. Acts 24, let me show you what it means to be mindful of another's pleasure in Scripture. Acts 24, look at verse 27. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. You see that? What does it mean to please your spouse? What is it? A pleasant reality. What does it mean? Well, here is an example, and there's one more in chapter 25. Same principle, verse 9. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? You know what he's trying to do? He is accommodating the Jews' desire. They wanted Paul bound. You know what he did? He was willing to show them a pleasure. You know what he did? He did what they wanted. That's what it means. He went out of his way to do the Jews a pleasure. And here he asks Paul, hey, the Jews are like, let him come down to here to be judged. And willing to show the Jews a pleasure, he goes to Paul and is like, will you go down there? Do you understand? He is representing the interest of the Jews. Not his interest, not Paul's interest, the Jews' interest. So when it comes to your spouse, are you representing their interest or yours? We live in a town where there are very limited eating out options. Is that fair to say? Don't amen too loud, I understand. But picture, if you would, a husband and a wife who's the wife hates Mexican food. Now you're really limited in our town. You might as well stay home at that point, pretty much. So this wife doesn't like Mexican food. And so the husband's like, hey, babe, I'm going to take you out tonight. Let's go on a date. The wife gets all giddy inside. Oh, my husband loves me. Yeah, I want to show you a pleasure. Where are we going? Oh, my favorite. Mexican? Absolutely. Let's go. You understand that you're not representing her interest. You want to splurge? What do you mean? We're going to get dessert. As a guy, oh yeah, don't you worry, babe. We got dessert. We're getting chocolate cake. I don't like chocolate. Aren't you glad you have a husband like me? At that point, no. She'd probably just rather stayed at home. They ate something at the house. And here's the amazing thing, because we do this, and I'm telling you, we do it a lot. We leave the restaurant going, well, she probably thinks high and mighty of me. And she leaves the restaurant going, you jerk. Why did I even come? This wasn't a night for me. It was a night for you. Let me tell you, it ought to be that it is a pleasant thing for our spouses to live with us. And that extends to the entirety of the family. It ought to be enjoyable for our kids to be parented by us. Now, that doesn't mean when they're wrong, we overlook their sin. It doesn't mean we don't judge that. It doesn't mean we don't discipline. None of that stuff, because that's not pleasant. That's not pleasant at all. If you're going to love life and see good days, you better eschew evil. That's right up there at the top of the list. That's not how you have good days. We're not talking about doing wrong. But we ought to be mindful of the other. And Porcius Festus here is willing to show the Jews a pleasure. When was the last time you did something because you know your spouse liked it? And when was the last time you did something that you know your spouse likes, but you did it in such a manner that they were actually able to enjoy it? If your husband likes fishing, you say, all right, we'll go fishing. I'm willing to show my husband a pleasure. I'm going to go fishing. And so you go out to the lake, and he starts fishing, and you're like, I'm going fishing with you, but you're going to put the worm on my hook. All right? You're going to get all the fish off. All right? No, not a problem, because the guy's like, hey, we get to go fishing. Let's do it. So he goes, and you go, I need your help. All right, let's go fishing. I need your help. All right, let's go fishing. Are you done yet? Oh, it's so miserable out here. It's hot. There's mosquitoes. Or you talk 90 miles an hour. You ever heard a guy say you're scaring away the fish? The fish don't care. He's the one that cares. That's a grandpa trick. I learned that. The fish don't care. That's grandpa that cared. My grandpa taught us how to be quiet. Here's what he said. He said, you know how you catch a good big fish? What's that? You keep the bait in your mouth. Yep. Later on, he told us, you keep the worms in your mouth when you're ice fishing. That way that keeps the bait warm. You know what he was teaching us? Quiet. Why? Grandpa, we want to go fishing. And all Grandpa's thinking is, I'm not going to get to fish. Hey, look, I've gone out with the boys from the church before, and we're going to do that again, hopefully sometime this year. But we've gone out. I don't bring my fishing pole anymore to go fishing with the boys of the church. I don't. You know why? Because I'm not going to fish. And that's okay. That's all right when that's what you're going out for. But I literally don't even bring my fishing pole. But hey, let's go fish because, Pastor likes to fish. Yeah. And then Pastor doesn't get to fish. That's not for Pastor. Like, you understand what I'm saying? Because we can be so selfish without even thinking about, without even intentionally, that we just do what we want. We did something the other day I thought my kids enjoyed. I really did. I'm telling you, we got to be careful. In fact, it's something that at one time they said they enjoyed. We got done with it. I'm like, what is going on? My kids aren't enjoying this at all. And neither one of them enjoyed it. It's like, why didn't you say something? And they're like, it's like, okay, what are you doing? Well, I get two choices now. I can either dwell with them according to knowledge, or I can pretend like they like it still and go do it because I like it. You understand the difference? So what did you do? We left them home the next time. Problem solved. My wife and I went and did it. Had a good time. I don't know what they're anyway. We live in a society, and we're going to close with this, but we live in a society that instills in us this idea that you're not supposed to enjoy one another's company. But we're in 1 Peter 3. Here's what he said. He said, we are heirs together of the grace of life. You understand, it ought to be enjoyable. It ought to be enjoyable just to live with one another. So here it is. In pleasing your spouse, there's a pleasant reality. We ought to be serving one another. In pleasing our spouse, being pleased to remain, means we ought to stay with one another. And in pleasing our spouse, when it comes to the physical relationship, we ought to be satisfying one another. That's the principle, the idea behind pleasing your spouse. It is taking that mentality, it's not about me, it's about them. Putting them first. Right? We understand that we're pulling together. And we get the idea that as a Christian, we ought to be preferring one another. But that preferring one another comes into this realm of pleasing our spouse. And it deals with, Paul dealt with in 1 Corinthians 7, not only that physical relationship in the first 9 verses, but that being pleased to remain in verses 10 through 16. Then at the end of the chapter, he's dealing with that pleasant reality where we are focusing on the interests and the desires of another and not our own. And it has to be that way. When a marriage is one spouse giving 100% and the other spouse taking 100%, it's destruction. When the marriage is one spouse giving 50%, the other spouse giving 50%, it's destruction. But when the marriage is one spouse giving 100% and focusing on the other, and the other spouse giving 100% and focusing on the other, then it's 100% and 100%, and it's a beautiful thing. And it's a productive thing, and it's a wonderful thing. And it ought to be that we represent to the world what marriage is supposed to look like, so much so that the world says, man, that's not like what we have. I mean, I know it's the same thing, but that ain't the same thing. Y'all actually want to be around each other. Because I got news for you. Most of the guys at the work where you go to all week long, they don't want to be around their wives. They look for every opportunity to get away from their wives. And listen, if you're a wife like that, the Bible says it's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop. You're not supposed to be that kind of spouse. You're supposed to be the kind of spouse that it's a pleasant reality to be with you. For many women in this society, their husbands don't have a clue. They don't know who their wife is. They feel like the only person that knows them is their BFF, their best friends, their girlfriends. They get me. Hey, listen, that's not how it's supposed to be either. And guys, our society, as gentlemen, as husbands, are happy to shirk our responsibility to the best friend. Yep, let them enjoy each other's life, and I get to just mind my own business. That's not why you signed up. So what does it mean to have a pleasant reality? Well, don't wait till he's checked out. Don't wait till she blows up. Or vice versa, whichever one of you is the more blow up type. Well, I guess now I'll have to. Hey, if all you're doing is the bare minimum, you're not even close to a pleasant reality. If your husband said, hey, I really like it when you wear this, and you wore it 2 years ago, you're missing out on a great opportunity. Guys, if your wife is like, I really like the smell of that cologne, who cares if you don't? Dude, wear the cologne. If your wife really likes the smell of the candle, who cares if candles are weird? Light the candle. I'm trying to help you. She ought to enjoy her house. This is one of those areas where this is a real thing. Guys don't need 57 pillows on a bed, on a couch, anywhere. Guys don't need it. You have a single guy, you know what he's got? King-size bed, 1 pillow. Why do you need 2? You have a girl, twin bed, 18 pillows. I know that's so. My daughter, it's insane. It's like, how do you even get in bed? Oh, I take pillows off. Well, why do you have them? I don't understand. So what should you do? Buy the pillows. Why? She enjoys them. Who cares if it doesn't make sense? She has to have a pleasant reality in her home. Or are you the only one that gets to have something you like? See, here's the problem. We've pushed Dad to a man cave. You get this one area, and look, most of the time it's what used to be the garage. Why? As far removed from the house as possible. If there was a shed in the back, well, you can have that. Call it the man cave. All you're doing is kicking Dad out the house. What you don't realize is it's amazing. You wonder why he wants to leave. You've asked him to. You've been teaching him that the only way he can have a good life is far removed from you as possible. Wake up. just don't know why my husband decided to leave me. You were pushing him out the door. Our society is becoming so separated. What God intends to be dwelling in unity. And we need to be on safeguard. We need to be on high alert. Hey, it ought to be very careful that our relationship with our spouse isn't about us, but them. But that's going to require some of that vulnerability that comes with true intimacy, discovering thyself to another, to your spouse.